On the behalf of the Legal Aid and Awareness Community at NLU Jodhpur, we are delighted to welcome you to this special session of our Darpan Initiative series. My name is Dhruv, and I'm joined by my colleague Ishan, as well as our committee members Pooja, Tasneem, Ashish, Soumya, and Anushka. Ma'am, we extend a warm welcome to you for today. Uh, for the benefit of the viewers, I would like to introduce Roshni ma'am. She is the founder and executive director of the Migration and Asylum Project, MAP, India's first and only dedicated law center for forced migration and displacement. MAP pioneered and institutionalized the concept of legal representation in the asylum process in India and is one of the few organizations globally to have been authorized by UNHCR to represent asylum claims before the agency, the UNHCR. Roshni ma'am has also the experience of working as a refugee status determination expert in various field offices, including India, Egypt, and the UAE. She has also been a visiting faculty member at the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, where she taught international refugee law. Now, to tell you a bit about our initiative Darpan, I would like to call upon our deputy convener, Tasneem Fatima.
Hello, am I audible? Okay. First of all, I would like to thank ma'am for joining us today. We are so grateful. So, the initiative that we've started is called Darpan Samvad, and it is one of the wings of our blog that we had called Darpan. Darpan means mirror, which is basically a platform that we have developed to highlight the ground realities. This has been done through sharing of real life stories of how things function on the ground and providing a legal perspective for the same as well. Through this platform, we're trying to engage law students as well as civil society workers and NGO workers and activists who are functioning towards assertion of rights and enforcement of rights of people. And we intend on providing a platform wherein we are able to connect the legislative intent behind legislations and what is the ground reality and the enforcement of the same at the ground level, and how much are we able to bridge the gap. Darpan Samvad is also an extension of this initiative here, wherein we are conducting an interview series with people who are working on the ground to ensure that the legislative intent actually reaches the ground and there is assertion of rights and enforcement of the laws in some ways. And therefore, we are trying to document the journey and the story of all of the change makers, which include people like you who are working for people who barely have a voice. And we're interviewing civil society workers. We recently also interviewed Govind Sir, who is the founder of Sambhali, an organization which works for the rights of LGBTQ people, women, and so on. And our objective behind this initiative is just to understand and document the story and the journey of how the civil society workers are functioning and ensuring implementation and enforcement and making things a ground reality. So for that, thank you so much for coming. And now I think we can begin with the interview.
Thank you, Tasneem. So coming to the first question, MAP has a diverse range of initiatives aimed at supporting migrant laborers and displaced communities through community-based legal awareness programs, particularly focusing on marginalized groups such as women and children. Could you elaborate on how MAP has impacted their ability to navigate complex legal systems and further expand on the role of legal empowerment in their lives?
Thank you, firstly, to all of you for having me. I think one of the sort of vacuums I felt when I was in law school was the fact that I was always interested in human rights. I was also part of my legal aid cell, but I didn't know how to make a career out of it. So there was a lot of sort of stories in my journey so far has been just experiments, some of which worked and some of which didn't. But MAP is a success story in that journey. But I think so something like this, where you are exposing students to how practitioners are working or how litigators are working in this space, or civil society actors, I think is really a great step. And I want to congratulate all of you for taking this initiative. I know coordinating with so many people is not an easy task, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Coming to the first question that you raised, I think it's for us, legal awareness is the core of what we do, right? And if I could just sort of sum up the mission of the organization, and you've already seen our website, so you know what we do. But it is, I think, the reason the initiative came about is the fact that we increasingly find ourselves in a society where an unjust society has been accepted as a way of life, right? Like we demand for food, we demand for education, but that is not the same for justice, because we have a lot of people in at least marginalized communities look at it as a luxury, as only something which rich people can afford. And when we were studying, and you are law students right now, that is not how we read the law, right? Like when we read the constitution, we read legal text, it's always that it has to serve those who are the most marginalized. And when you started you get out of law school and you see reality is very different from that. And I think all our initiatives that we have, whether it be for refugees or for migrants or for women, the idea is that the law needs to reach them, and they need to be able to tangibly access justice, tangibly access support, documentation. And these are not esoteric concepts which, like you hear about. In terms of like legal awareness, we do a lot of community-based drives. We do a lot of door-to-door campaigns with this objective that you shouldn't expect people in the community to come to a lawyer themselves, understand their rights. You have to make it more democratic. So you need to go to these communities with that information. And once you give that information, then next what? Like then there should be easily accessible legal aid services, which are quality legal aid services available to them. So we do community legal desks, I think once or twice in different settlements across Delhi. We operate out of public spaces. We operate out of Asha Anganwadi centers, which allows women to sort of approach us more easily because these are safe spaces, created by the government. And in addition to that, we also train community leaders and paralegals so that they become their first point of contact. So in case of an emergency, they are the first people they approach, who can also relate to their situation, context, and their problems, and then can refer these cases to us. So that is typically the model that we follow. So yeah, I would be happy to answer more questions on this.
Ma'am, so as you mentioned that MAP has been very actively working on the area of refugee rights in India. I wanted to ask, so how does MAP support refugees in understanding and
Yeah.
navigating the legal processes and systems of agencies like the UNHCR? And what specific challenges do refugees face that would differ them from other migrant communities, for example?
Right. Right. So let me start with the irony of that. The irony is that when we started the organization, it was dedicated for like providing services to refugees, because I saw them as the most marginalized, because they're almost invisible. They're also highly politicized. They're subject to a lot of hostilities, and they face a lot of exploitation, not just in their home country because there is war and conflict, but also during transit, because they're subject to very, very dangerous escape routes. That's typically what they take, and we've all seen those images now. I don't think refugee issues is anything which anybody is not familiar with today, right? Like post Syria, post Ukraine, and all these wars that we're seeing right now. But that being said, when COVID happened, up until COVID happened, we were only working as a refugee law center. But when COVID happened, I think media played a big role in exposing how vulnerable internal migrants were. And these are technically citizens who have more rights, who are supposed to have more access to government schemes, etc. They shouldn't need a UN or some other parallel body, because we are supposed to protect them. These are our citizens. But we saw these communities who live along with refugee communities in most settlements. They're all undocumented, so they typically tend to cluster around the same areas and colonies. We saw them being, if not like equally, if not more vulnerable in these cases. They had no documentation, they have language barriers, they have very little understanding of their rights. So in that sense, I actually, it was surprising to me that we didn't see too many we saw more similarities between these two groups than differences. And that also motivated us to use our experience working with refugees, with forced migrants, to then bring in that sort of knowledge and experience to work with internal migrants. With refugees specifically, their biggest problem is being able to access asylum. All right. And that is what I was doing in UNHCR. I was there a decision maker. So I was maybe 25. I was quite young when I was doing that work. And I could often see the fact that I had to reject a case only because the person didn't know how to present their case effectively, right? Like they would hear rumors in the community that say that you are an interpreter for the US embassy and then you'll get recognized. Then every next 30 cases will be about I'm an interpreter. But actually, the genuine case of why they fled their country is even more powerful and it's genuine. That is a credible story. But they would come and present different stories. That's just an example. Or sometimes somebody is just too traumatized. With the experience of conflict and displacement, that they don't know how to articulate what this how why they left their country, which fits the international law definition, because international law and all these concepts are so, like, I mean, it's not something which they're familiar with, right? So I think I myself found that there were times when I wanted to recognize a particular applicant and grant asylum, but I felt that the person was just not giving me the right information which I could use to make an assessment. So that really bothered me. And my idea was that there has to be, this is a quasi-judicial process, therefore there has to be legal representation. And the UN, being an institution which takes pride in rule of law and transparency, etc., needs to introduce this concept. So we were amongst the first organizations, even globally, who introduced the idea of legal representation in the UN process. And today it is something which is lauded in by the headquarters, and it's being replicated in other jurisdictions as well. So we are sometimes called upon by lawyers in, say, Indonesia and other jurisdictions to help them develop a MOU between lawyers and the UNHCR to pioneer this concept in their countries. So that is something which we are quite proud of, also something which we are known for. But like I said, post COVID, we then expanded our work because it didn't seem right for us to just go to a settlement and just work with one community, and when the other community, which is our own community, is even more in need of legal protection. So very organically, we started expanding the scope of our desks, the legal aid desk, which used to have refugee law experts earlier. Now we started having people who are working on labor issues, who are working on sexual and gender-based violence. The reason why we work on labor and sexual and gender-based violence is because those are the bulk of the cases which will come to you from marginalized communities when you set up a legal aid desk. So yeah, I think I'll stop here. And yeah, please feel free to ask me a follow-up question.
Ma'am, on the subject of refugee rights itself, so especially for refugee children, they face a lot of trauma when they enter into their host nations. Now,
Yeah.
we also had the opportunity to read the report of MAP on socio-economic rights that are available to refugees, which has a dedicated section on the right to education of
Right.
refugee children.
Right.
And so, what are the challenges that they face in accessing the right to education, and how has MAP's advocacy also played a role in this?
Okay, so I think with children, you've seen the report and right to education. If you look at the language of the act, it doesn't just apply to children who are citizens, right? It's children within the territory of India. So we often tend to rely on these kind of complementary legislations where it applies to residents and not citizens, which allows us to expand some protection to undocumented communities, right? So in this case, yeah, refugee children, basically under RT Act, if they approach a government school, they have to be admitted under RT at the primary education level. However, that being said, and that is happening in schools in Delhi. I've seen that with a number of MCD schools, but there is lack of information. There is so you need advocacy to sort of familiarize, make these schools familiar with refugee children. They come from a different education board. There has to be a provision for bridge classes, which UNHCR does conduct, so that they can transition from that to studying in India. But obviously, at a practical level, there are a number of barriers. One is Aadhaar. Aadhaar is like a big barrier because everybody demands Aadhaar for anything today, right? Even though you may have your Supreme Court judgment, but that is the reality. So to appear for a board exam, for registration, for availing any sort of government schemes, and when I say government schemes, it's a small token amount being given for, like, say, stationery allowance, etc., for children in primary schools. Even to access that, you need to have a bank account. To open a bank account, you need KYC. For KYC, you need Aadhaar. So somehow all roads will finally lead to, like, these one or two documentation which refugees don't have access to, or they're not entitled to apply for these. So that is one big hurdle. Secondly, like, you need to understand that these are, like you've rightly sort of pointed out, these are children with trauma. They've not come from normal situations, right? They've come from countries which are experiencing conflict for decades, like Afghanistan, Myanmar, Somalia. All these countries have been experiencing conflict for many, many years. And so these are children coming from there. So a lot of times they need additional support, they need additional counseling, maybe they will need like a mental health service provider on campus, which I mean understandably MCD schools cannot provide. So there are some parallel systems which have been set up by the UN and other institutions, civil society, to sort of help address these gaps, but definitely more can be done. The third thing is that RT is only till primary education. So even if a child gets admitted, then what next, right? So refugees don't have access to tertiary education. Some of them can apply for something called a long-term visa, which the government gives, and the long-term visa is given completely at the discretion of the Ministry of Home Affairs. So you can get it for 3 months, you can get it for 1 year, or you can just be denied the visa. There's no sort of there's no way to map that trend as to who's going to get it and who's not. So if you get the long-term visa, you technically can apply for university level education with that visa, but you have to pay as a foreign student, and there's a huge difference between what Indian students pay and what foreign students have to pay. And as you can imagine, refugees don't have the economic means to access something like that. So we see very, very, very few refugees going to universities or to sort of IGNU has this open school, and they have certain like courses. Some of them apply for that, but we see a troubling trend, which is that a majority of refugee children in some communities are just going to churches, or like they're going to sort of theological schools, because they don't find a place in regular, like, primary education space in India.
Yes, ma'am. We understand that MAP's focus has been on socio-legal awareness, advocacy, assistance. So how has MAP been able to get together stakeholders, each of whom may be having some different ambitions under one single umbrella?
Right. So I think that is I don't have the answer to that very clearly. I can just tell you what we've learned in the process, and it's not an easy task, honestly, because I mean, when you talk about different stakeholders, I'm sort of categorizing them into 3-4 groups. One is the community itself. Then you have your other partners, legal aid, legal aid is one part of it, but you also need NGOs who are working on education, working on health, working on reproductive health rights, etc. So it's bringing them together. And then you have the legal aid sector itself. So not just lawyers like us, but you will want paralegal volunteers, you would want the district, state level, taluk level legal aid service providers, like institutional actors, to also support what you're doing. Then of course there are the courts and formal litigation, and then coordinating with people in the formal justice sector. Okay. And I think the experiences are different with different stakeholders. With the community, I feel we know how to bring them in now. We've done this work for 10 years. They are. I recently went for a conference where a UN conference, and the tagline was that nothing about us without us, and that was a tagline to make sure that refugees are part of that conversation. So, like somebody like me, I'm not a refugee, but I'm the one who's like talking about them and their rights. And I think it's sort of a mirror to people like us that, okay, like it's great what you're doing, but you need to do this along with people who have actually experienced displacement, because they are the best advocates for something like this. And that is something which, because I worked in the UN before, it was something which was very familiar to me. And I'd seen that at play. So we include like our beneficiaries, for a lack of better word, the community members right from the beginning. Even when we are about to pitch a program, we have a design, we'll do a scoping, we'll do a focus group, and we'll test the idea. We will ask our clients, we'll ask our long-term, community workers, etc. And they're involved right from the design phase up until impact assessment, which is that if we've implemented the program for 3 years, we will go back to them and then ask them what worked, what didn't work, and we again do a series of interviews. And then we do like a multi-stakeholder meeting at the end of the program to share our learnings and sort of give that report to other NGOs who want to take this work forward. With, I think, NGOs, it's a little bit more tricky because everybody has a different mandate, everybody has different funding, and we are all also trying to get, it's a limited like pie, and we're all trying to get a piece of the same pie in some cases. What has worked for us is the fact that you communicate right from the beginning what is the purpose of that collaboration. It's important to develop very clear terms of reference and MOUs between different partners to know what is your mandate, what is your interest, how are we aligned together, and if we are not, better to sort of walk away from this now than later. So I think that has worked quite well for us. And the other thing is to be humble. I think that that's a big lesson that works for government actors, works for civil society, works for the community. Like, listen and learn. Don't go into a community saying, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to tell you about your rights. I think it's important to know, to listen to them, because sometimes they know. We learn far more from community workers than what we can sitting in a classroom, for example. So I think, yeah, some of these sort of methodologies have worked quite well. And I think another thing, which last thing which I'll sort of point out, is before starting any program, we do a very thorough needs assessment or a scoping exercise. So like I said, we do a survey, we write it down, we put down our findings in a report, and then we do a stakeholder consultation. So in a way, most of our partners are like sort of partnerships are formed during the stage, because they know that we're being serious about this program. We're not just coming in with like preconceived ideas, because that survey sort of indicates that we're here to listen, learn, and understand, and then we will take your inputs to design a program. I think that approach is something we adopt almost for any program, that new program that we launch, which has worked quite well. Yeah. Please feel free to tell me if I'm going over time.
No, ma'am, not at all. Ma'am, building a follow-up on that question, we want something from you about how you have built your paralegal volunteers. In continuation, what has been some challenges in building such, and the persistent issues which you still face today?
Right. So the paralegal volunteer scheme, I mean, I have to say, and I've said this many times before, is that I'm almost embarrassed to say that as a lawyer, being a part of this legal community, I had no idea what paralegal volunteers were until maybe about 3-4 years ago. All right. And I'm not only I'm not only a lawyer, but I'm also in the legal aid space, and I didn't know what PLVs are. I sort of had heard about paralegals, but I thought it is student paralegals, but not. I didn't know much about the scheme. And I think through a friend I got to know about it, and I started looking it up. And to me, the paralegal volunteer scheme is something, I don't know how familiar all of you are, but it's a 2009 scheme which NALSA implemented, and it's, I mean, on paper, it's a very good scheme. It is, if you know about ASHA and Anganwadi workers, it is the parallel of that within the legal space. So you have community members who are 12th pass being trained to act as first line of responders. So the idea is that if something happens to me within my settlement, I should easily be able to go to a person from within my community who knows basic, like, legal procedures, like help them go to the police station and file an FIR, is able to connect them to a one-stop center or to a Mahila Panchayat, or like, local panchayat systems, etc., who have an understanding of the governance structure, of grassroots support structures, and of the legal systems. So how to connect that person to a legal aid panel lawyer, for example. So these paralegal volunteers have to be trained for, they have a 3-day orientation, and after that they're supposed to have refresher courses in specialized areas of law, and then they're supposed to be assigned work by the District Legal Services Authority. Now, in terms of the challenges that we saw, is there are many, but I still maintain that this is a really good scheme on paper, and it all comes down to the implementation, and that is where the problem lies, is the fact that a lot of, if you look at the paralegal volunteers registered with DLSA in certain states, most of them are law students, right? They're not community based people, and the idea behind PLVs is that at least it should be a mix, because law students like you, like, no matter how good your intention is, you will never be able to operate, or at the community level as effectively as somebody who is from the community, who understands the problems of the people, etc. So one is the fact that there are not enough community based people. The representation of women in some states is great. In some states it's at least 50. In some states it's very poor. And again, this is particularly concerning given the fact that a bulk of the cases which PLVs handle today in India are domestic violence cases, like routine domestic violence, and other forms of like sexual exploitation, etc. And so if you don't have enough women in that network, I don't know how. I'm sure there are more cases which are waiting to be reported, but they don't come up. And the third problem is the lack of training. So I think they do in several places. We've heard that they have something like a orientation course in the beginning, but you cannot cover like the whole ambit of law in 3 days, right? Like, so you need to keep doing this. There has to be a continuing education program which they don't have access to. Apart from that, I think in terms of how work is allocated to PLVs, it's very sporadic. Sometimes they're just engaged for a month to do legal awareness. After that, they're not given any work. So none of them are able to make a livelihood out of this. Like Asha Anganwadi workers, they're not able to do the same because you may get it's very erratic, the work. Some PLVs are very overworked, and some of them have had no work since they've gone for orientation. So there's no sort of management of PLVs is not consistent, and money always remains a problem, right? Like I think the per day like the amount which is given is anywhere between 250 rupees to 500 rupees, and for example in a state like Delhi, that doesn't even cover your travel allowance from going from one settlement to the other. So yeah, these are typically like the problems that we've heard from PLVs. In terms of how, I think you also asked me how MAP addresses them. Was that part of the question? Yeah.
Ma'am, I think we have
Okay.
sufficiently dealt with that in this only.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Ma'am, thank you for that insight. Ma'am, also, LAC has also had the opportunity to work with MAP on our first inter-university public interest litigation competition,
Yeah.
and also contribute to the drafting of the report on the recent labor law codes. And
Right.
it has been an honor and privilege. But what, according to you, is the role of legal aid clinics in various universities, and how is MAP also fostering that?
Right. So I think for with legal aid clinics, it's this kind of work I think which is very valuable to us, because when you did that assignment with us, you saw the how expansive the law is when it comes to labor laws. Right, there are more than like 100 different acts. There's state level, central level, and to be able to compile all of this and make sense of it, and then to present it in a way that our community workers and paralegal volunteers can understand that, or understand the crux of it, so that they can support people within their settlements, is a different challenge. But I think these kind of joint like research initiatives is definitely something you should actively seek out for. I know that several NGOs would greatly benefit from this kind of engagement, because people working in the space who are not lawyers are generally have a fear of the law, because it just seems very intimidating. So I think something like this helps people like process information in bite size, like easy to understand format, and I think there's a great need for that. And as lawyers, we have this tendency to complicate something and overcomplicate something which is already complicated. I think we need to sort of resist from doing that, and we are guilty of it all the time. So for example, whenever we make a paralegal module, like one of the constant feedbacks we will get is make it simpler, make it simpler, make it simpler. Okay, so sometimes we have to keep doing it 3-4 times, and get like a paralegal volunteer from our community to come and read it and then tell us whether it's workable or not. And that is how the community also participates in the work that we do. I feel the legal aid cell, like I said in the beginning itself, that I think a series like this, which not just tells you, like, it's not just about working on assignments, but just hearing about practical experiences and looking at the human side of the work that takes place. I think that is critical, because labor law, the general feeling, I don't know how it is in law schools today, but the general feeling on labor law was always that it's a very dry subject. People are not particularly motivated to take this up as an area of specialization. Even I remember even our seminar courses, it didn't have too many takers, right? And there is always this sort of lawyers or law students naturally gravitate towards corporate law or banking and finance, and the more sort of lucrative professions, and nothing wrong with that. My concern is always with people, perhaps people like me, who were in that space, who were interested in doing this work, but didn't have access to enough information, didn't have access to people who could sort of mentor me or guide me. There weren't enough like opportunities. But I think that is not the case today. Like even in the 15 years that I've worked in this space, I've seen the number of like civil society actors increasing. I see a lot more academic research being put out there. And I see a lot more students being interested in this work, who approach us for internships, or who approach us for like research work, etc. So I do definitely see a big change, and I think legal aid centers can provide that clinical exposure, which I think is critical for you to, like I said, see the human side of the work that we do. It's not just about the law. It's about what motivates you is the fact that after having worked on the case, and you may have, for example, in a wage theft case, you may have recovered 5,000 rupees for your client. All right, it's not much, but you can see the kind of change it brings about in that person's life. And it's not just monetary. That person will then bring another two people who want to report a rights violation to you. We've had a former client bring their children to us, like 12th standard, 12th pass child to us, saying please train this person as a paralegal volunteer because your paralegal volunteer really helped me and I want my son to do that. So there are these stories, and some of it sounds cheesy perhaps, but I think unless you see that side of things, you can't remain motivated to do this work, and we only see that side. And I think that's a great privilege for us to constantly be in the community and work with people and see the change. Yeah.
Ma'am, so MAP has, for example, MAP has been there for 10 years and it celebrated its 10th anniversary, I think, last year. And it has overcome a lot of challenges. Listening to you, I felt like that. So, where do you see the organization going, and where do you see it progressing further? What initiatives will it be taking?
So, I mean, 10 years, like I said, for us also was like a period to pause and reflect on what has happened in the last 10 years. And it's always any success story is always part of it is hard work, part of it is, having a very clear vision and strategy, etc., which I don't think we did. But I think for us, a lot of it is serendipitous. I think things also sort of worked out organically for us. For example, like when I started the organization, I didn't know much about FCRA. I didn't know much about compliance. I was 29, so I had only worked in an organization as the in the junior rung as an employee, right? So I had never even had the opportunity to see bigger like systems, how HR systems are made for executives or like mid-level staff, how to retain people and all of that. So I think for me the challenge was more the managerial aspect. I don't have an MBA degree, for example, but I think a lot of that, it's a very, very steep learning curve. So you have to learn how to manage people, how to manage egos, how to engage with government, how to be careful in the work that you do. And I think the biggest challenge has also been seeing changes, right? Like like political changes. Like like I'm talking today about conflicts which didn't exist when we started. And the idea when I started was that this will reduce, like over a period of time, the world will become a better place. But unfortunately that is not how it is, and you have to keep up with that. Like you need to know your information. If a new client tomorrow comes from Ukraine, you need to know their political context, what they've been through, to be able to assist them. So it sort of constantly keeps you on your toes in terms of like reading up and knowing the changes. In addition to that, the environment, and I think this is globally, this is true, because I think working in the development sector is challenging. And you have to be careful with how you present your point. You have to be careful with the kind of work that you do. A lot of our work has also been in litigation, and even today, even litigation is seen as like like earlier activism was a bad word, right? Like so, then advocacy became a bad word. So now I feel even litigation, now you people donors think twice when you say we are working on rule of law systems. Rule of law, access to justice, all of that doesn't have takers today, right? Like because donors today want something which is quick, which is easily you can understand. You can make a reel about it, you can put it on your brochure, and you can say this is the impact I've had. And that you can have when you are working in education, or like something where you can see something tangible. But unfortunately justice doesn't work that way. What you need is like long term allies who have that level of patience and faith in you, that fine, I will be with you for the next 10 years and support you, so that 5,000 people will be able to access justice. So, like I said, I mean, going back to the beginning of the interview, I think justice is just seen as a good to have today, which is so unfortunate, because, I mean, that is as critical as anything else, right? Any critical service that a person needs. Um, and for me, I think that's been a big challenge. And of course, like compliance and finance, like I said, these are not things which I have a background in, but I've had to learn that on the job. And but that being said, I think what our journey also proves is that all of this is possible. All of this is secondary if you're committed to what you really want to do, which is to serve people in the community, which is to make access to justice democratic and a reality. I think that everything else takes a backseat, and you will sort of go through that just so that you can keep to your mission. So,
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, you had your you had a policy background where you also had your stint in some international institutions. What shall be your message for law students who are listening to us, wanting to work in this regard only? And secondly, what avenues does MAP offer for the same?
So I think my advice, if I can say, I think I'm old enough now to give you all advice, is the fact that at least the development sector space, I think you need to be particularly proactive. I think a lot of other spaces, like even I would say that's true probably for litigation also, but certain other sectors in the legal field, they are more organized, they're more structured, easy to access information, easy to apply, and you know what your career trajectory is. Like in a law firm, you know from the time you start, you know what where you will be in, like, say 10 years or 15 years. But I think with the development sector, it is still evolving, it is constantly evolving. I think there are different kinds of institutions being set up, different structures being followed, and I think this sector demands you to be more proactive to find out what works for you, what is, because it's completely interest and passion driven, right? Like you're actively giving up lucrative opportunities to be here. So I think it is critical that you need to take care of yourself and ensure that you remain committed. Like never go into something because it sounds good, and in between, like, once you join you don't like it. My advice to even like young lawyers who are in the office is then leave it. If you don't like it, don't do it, because this profession takes a lot out of you. So the thing which keeps you going is the fact that you love what you do, and I think that only you can answer for yourself. So I think that you can do by interning in different places. Don't sort of be, I see a lot of law students being quite scared to experiment because you want to build your CV in a way so that you can get into a particular place, or you can sort of crack the campus recruitment, etc. And I have nothing against that. I think that's a great thing to do. But I think wherever you can experiment, if you're doing, like, instead of a 2-month summer internship, if you can do 2 internships, do that and try and experiment. Don't be in a rush to do your masters. I think take that time in between for 2-3 years, get some ground level experience, be it in whichever sector that you like. But this is particularly true for the development sector. I think get at least 2-3 years of work ex before you decide to specialize, because I think 22 is too early for you to know how, like, I remember in law school I was very interested in patents, but only when you started like working in that space, like, then I realized I didn't. So yeah, a lot of things change. In terms of avenues, like I said, there are a lot of avenues today to sort of work in the space. In terms of policy, there is, you can work in international tribunals, you can, there are fellowships, you can work in India, you can work in regional organizations, network, etc. um, in terms of MAP, I know this will amount to self promotion, but because you asked me this question, I'm going to respond to it. Is we do have something called Catalyst for Change Fellowship. It is for a fresh graduate. We don't expect you to have any kind of experience in the field. What we expect you to have is an interest to know more, and that is our way of sort of providing you support. You will work in not just one team. Sometimes we will assign you to a different team. It's a good way for you to understand community level work, policy level work, litigation work sometimes. And so it's for 2 years. So it's for a maximum of 2 years, and then after that we expect the fellow to, if they're interested, they can apply for a formal, like a permanent role within the organization, or some of them will go for higher studies, etc. We also have something called the Legal Aid Partners Network, which is for early career lawyers who are litigating, who are already working in a chamber, and they may be doing arbitration, commercial law, anything, but they're still interested in doing some pro bono work. If they're willing to commit like a certain number of hours a month, then the cases that come to us from the community, we assign that to our partners, whoever is available to take up that case that month. So that's been quite successful. We've had quite a few, like, litigating lawyers who are registered with us as legal aid partners. So that is a way for you to sort of give back a little bit without having to, like, make a career out of it, or dedicate 100% of your time to it. Yeah, and apart from that, we have in Delhi, we have, from law schools, we have students registering with us as paralegal volunteers, so that they can go through that training. They help us then do like legal awareness drives, they help us set up legal desks, etc. So yeah, so you can also register with us as a paralegal volunteer and sort of work with us on a particular program. So yeah.
That is a great message, and I'm sure our listeners and readers would immensely benefit from the opportunities that you've highlighted. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. It has been a really, really edifying session for us, and we look forward to working on more future collaborations with you and ma'am.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for the very well researched questions. And for having gone through the reports and all the information on our website. I think that itself shows how interested all of you have been in, doing continuing this work with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your time, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am.